Good morning. Good morning, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us for today's Breakfast at Blake Reunion Edition during this Blake's 2025 Reunion and Homecoming Week. I'm Melissa Allen, class of '82, and I'm honored to represent the Alumni Board and also the Office of Institutional Advancement, who are the sponsors of these wonderful events known as Breakfast at Blake. Well, we want to give a special welcome to all alums who are joining us for homecoming or celebrating the reunion, and we want to give a special congratulations to the Blake and Northrop class of 1975 alums who are celebrating their 50th reunion, and they're the first graduating class after the merger, so it's an extra special milestone for Blake as well. So please join me in giving a round of applause to our 50th reunion attendees and everyone here celebrating a reunion or homecoming. Now to present the 2025 Outstanding Alumnus Award, please join me in welcoming our head of school, Dr. Ann Stabney.
Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here. All right, it's good to see you all. I have the distinct pleasure of presenting the 2025 Outstanding Alumnus Award. This honor goes to our speaker this morning, Jim Stock. Jim is a member of the class of 1974. While at Blake, he was a member of the Glee Club. He won the Yale Trophy, as well as the Spirit of the Blake School Award. After attending Blake, Jim received a bachelor's degree in physics from Yale University. He went on to earn an MS in statistics and a PhD in economics from the University of California, Berkeley. Jim serves currently as Harvard University's Vice Provost for Climate and Sustainability and as the director of the Harvard Salata Institute for Climate and Sustainability. For nearly 40 years, he has taught at Harvard. His research areas are macroeconomic forecasting, monetary policy, econometric methods, and environmental policy. A textbook he co-wrote is a leading undergraduate resource on econometrics, and he has served in various editing positions for different organizations and academic journals throughout his career. Jim also serves on the panel of advisors of the Congressional Budget Office and on a committee for the National Bureau of Economics Research. He is a university fellow at Resources for the Future and a non-resident senior fellow of economic studies at the Brookings Institute's Center on Regulation and Markets. In 2006, he was elevated to a fellowship of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. In 2010, he won a Scholarly Achievement Award from the Center for International Research on Economic Tendency Surveys. And from 2013 to 14, he served as a member of President Obama's Council of Economic Advisors. Today, we're proud to honor Jim with this award, which honors Blake alumni who have demonstrated outstanding leadership, achievement, and influence in their field and community. Jim, today we honor you with this citation. The Blake School recognizes Jim Stock for outstanding contributions to the study and practice of economics, for your leadership in the areas of climate and sustainability, and for inspiring future generations of researchers, public servants, and environmental advocates. Congratulations, Jim. It's my pleasure to present you with Blake's 2025 Outstanding Alumnus Award. Have right here.
Thank you, Ann. That was just really. I'm just really flattered, and have imposter syndrome and all of that stuff. So that was really nice. I guess that photo has been taken down. Fashions are not exactly the same as they were 50 years ago. And I'm glad that photo was taken down, but I wouldn't mind having some of that hair, I have to say. Just some of it would be great. But that unfortunately is probably a wish that will never be fulfilled. I just want to say a couple of words about Blake. I'm going to talk about climate policy today, which is the main thing that I work on professionally. So I'm going to say a few words about that. But I want to say a few words about Blake, a few years thinking back to the merger 50 years ago, and for a few personal remarks in that regard. And then I'll say something about like what I've done, just my family and that sort of thing, just to spend there's a few minutes on that. But I actually really want to focus on the substance at hand here. Let me just say a few things just about Blake, what I feel like, what were the things that I took away from Blake the most. I think, so I'll take three. So I don't know what the rules are on sports. I thought the rule on like doing all the three sports was really great. I was never much of an athlete, and I had classes and like whatever. I was not that terrific, but it was really good because it's instilled in me a sort of lifetime exercise and realization that I could, do these things and recognize the value of exercise and a healthy lifestyle. And so that was actually really helpful, even though I was never particularly skilled at it. So I don't know what the deal is today, but I thought that was good. I think there was a approach to leadership actually on a more serious note. That is something that I actually really did take away about how there was an expectation of growing up and actually taking responsibilities. It's sort of the theory of like from whom much has been given, much is expected, and that is a motto that I think was sort of instilled in me through my experience in Blake, and it's actually really been a guiding principle. I had tremendous opportunities and tremendous advantages, and it's incumbent to take those advantages and to do something for social welfare as a result of that. And I was going to say a final little thing. I'm really glad to hear. I understand that we still have a public speaking requirement for the seniors. Is that right? Great. That's like, oh man, that was scary, but it was really useful to realize you could do it. And I think that's part of the leadership thing. Like when you're expected to lead, you're expected to be able to communicate in public. And so that was, I think, a very useful exercise. Let me say a couple of words about the merger. So we are the last class. You're the first class of the merged school, and we are the last class of the single-sex schools. And some of you might know that, we were involved in the throes of making that happen, and we had busing over to the Northrop campus and whatever, and it was fine, it was good. I was actually pleased to how it's happened. I think the more personal aspect of it is, as some of you know, my mom, Barbara Stock, started out as a 9th grade English teacher at Northrop, and then she was head of school, what they called back then headmistress. So she was headmistress of Northrop for 7 or 8 years through 1974. So she played a really important role in the merger, and she had these stories of let's say old school trustees that needed some help in moving forward with the merger, and she was tough as nails, and she made sure that they got the help that they needed. And then she was head of the merged school, upper school. She was head of school for the upper school, which was over on the Northrop or the Kenwood campus. And then supervised a lot of that before she then moved on to take a job similar to what Dr. Stavney is going to do, which is she would then moved on to Boston, in her case, to be head of the National Association of Independent Schools. So anyway, she would be so thrilled to be in spirit. She is here, and she would be so thrilled to see what a success this 50 years of the merger have been and how thriving this institution is. She'd be very proud, and I'm very proud, and you should all be very proud of yourselves too. So let me say a few things. I was just going to talk all about sort of academic type stuff, climate policy and so forth. But I will say a few family things. This is a picture from a canoe trip. That's my wife right there. This is a kayak trip, excuse me, that we took in Greenland a couple of summers ago, and yeah, there was a lot of melting glaciers. And you know, I mean, these changes are real. These changes are upon us. And for the last 10 or 12 years, the main thing I've been doing is working on climate energy policy, and I'll be talking about that in passing. I just want to say a few things. I feel it's incumbent on me to say a few things on a personal note. So Dan gave a very generous summary of my academic and professional life. Let me just say a few personal things. I've got a wonderful family, 2 kids who are now in their 30s. And my wife, who wishes she could be here. I'll show you where she is in just a second. This is one of the things, so I'm just going to tell you one hobby that I took up, which I actually got dragged into by my daughter, is being a cross-country ski coach. So, you know, I bet there's a bunch of you who, you know, your son or your daughter is in 7th grade soccer or whatever it is, and then somebody walks over to you and they say, it looks like you've played soccer before, we need a coach, will you help coach? And you say, I don't know anything about this. I said, you can learn, you know, and then be a coach. And so, okay, I said, all right, I'll do that. So I'd done cross-country skiing before, and I'd actually done some of it in college, but, you know, I was like, whatever. But so I decided if I'm going to do this, I should do it for real. And it was not being done for real in the Boston area. It was being done in a really, I don't know, walk around in the woods on skis. And I thought if we're going to do this, we're going to do it for real. So we're going to really learn how to ski properly. We're going to focus on technique. We're going to study what's being done internationally. The U.S. situation was, what's the matter? The U.S. at the time was actually really backwards in terms of its skiing education and its coaching technology. So we said, okay, we're going to do this, and we're going to learn. We're going to learn how to ski. So I happened to have some really talented athletes, and that was super fun. So I just have to show you. This is all right. This is going to sound a little bit like bragging, but I'm very proud of my skiers. Very proud of my skiers. So this is, I think, like my 3rd year of coaching, and these are the people who got some medals at one of our regional things called the New England Bill Coke Festival. So one of them is Julia Kern, and she has moved on to be on the U.S. ski team, and she won she's got a couple of medals on a couple of World Cup podiums. She's going to be in the Olympics this year. You know, if she gets selected to be on the sprint relay team, she's got a good chance of a medal with the sprint relay team, doing that probably with Jessie Dickens. Another one, my daughter, this is a picture of her. She was actually just as good as Julia, but she had some health issues. So here's a picture of her in a World Cup that she qualified for when she was 17, but then had some health issues. This young lady, Kate Brahms, is now the head coach of the Harvard ski team. And let's see, this is my son, and he's actually doing cross-country coaching. What if there's like 11 of these kids here, and 9 of them were junior national All-Americans, which means top 10 in junior nationals. So we've continued this on. This is great fun. We've had we've probably had 1,500 kids come through our program. And it's just like been a real joy for my life, and it's really a real joy for my family. We do a lot of canoeing in the Quetico. We come back here. Here's my son learning how to flip a Minnesota 4. So for those of you who canoe, you can see this is a 4-person, 24-foot canoe. So it's a little more cumbersome than the usual Minnesota 2s that you might rent up there. So this is in the rain, in the water. So this is a very typical canoe trip. You know, everybody shows these beautiful, like, sunny pictures, but this is what it's really like. So, all right. And my wife wishes she could be here. There's my son and my daughter. That's from NCAA's, a while ago. And then my wife kind of wishes what's her right? She does not wish she was here. She regrets that it coincides with a trip that she's taking a bike trip that she's taking from the Canadian border to the Mexican border along the Pacific coast. So that's that. This is a photo from about a week ago in Northern Oregon. Okay. All right. So let me tell you a little bit. Let me tell you a little, some professional stories, and I have to put up some shots here. I think the time, so there's actually, my career actually is largely into a couple of different stages. So one of the stages was when I was doing econometrics and working with students, and I was really committed. Actually, one thing I will say, and I got this from my mom and all of her stories about the old school trustees, is I said that I'm not going to do that. I'm going to really support women as my graduate students, and I'm in a very male field, which is econometrics, which is statistics applied to economics, and it was just like all guys. And I said that's like wasting half of our talent. So I really made a point in recruiting graduate students. I am very proud. One of the things I'm actually proudest of is that the first tenured female econometrician at MIT, actually at any major university, was my student, and she's terrific. She's great. And so we have a number of other things like that, but I've been very supportive of that. And somebody who I was an RA for in graduate school, Janet Yellen over there, has also been a real mentor to me and a real guide. And she in many ways reminds me of my mom, like tough as nails. And she's really looks like a grandmother, and then will be careful. My career, I think, sort of doing all of this academic stuff really shifted when I had the opportunity to be in the White House for a few years. So I was a member of the Council of Economic Advisors. My job was macroeconomics and then climate and energy policy, which I knew something about, but I learned. And so I think what I really realized there is that this was a huge opportunity for me to really make a difference in an area that is like far more important than just like proving theorems about econometrics, you know? Meaningful pictures. This is a view from my office when I was working at the White House. We were in the old executive office building, and this was just out my office window, and I walked in. I always go to work early because that's my body clock. And so I was in, this is November 22nd, 2013, and I looked out the window. I said, gosh, that's kind of weird. Why is the flag at half-staff? And I was thinking, I know when he died. You know, what was this all about? November 22nd, 2013. Anyone know what that is? 50th anniversary of the JFK assassination. I'm looking at that and I'm saying, holy cow. You think about what was it like for the person sitting in my office 50 years ago today? What's it been like for the people sitting in my office every day for the next 50 years? Who are these people? I didn't know. I didn't know like 97% of who those people were that were in my office. They're kind of moderately famous at their time, but then they're lost to history. But they're there doing their job every day, trying to make the country a better place. Are they all pure as the driven snow? No. Do some of them have foibles? Yes. But everybody was there because they were trying to make their country a better place. And it was it's a very emotional experience for me. It made me realize that going back to this Blake thing, that we have this responsibility for leadership, and we have this responsibility to take what we've been given and to make the world a better place. And so at that point, I said, I'm going to switch completely over to doing climate, because that's like what is more interesting and more important, I think, in terms of my comparative advantage. I've got, I've got all these connections. Why don't you use them, okay, to see what progress you can make. Okay, so that's what I've been doing. So I'm going to talk a little bit about climate. So this is, I'm going to give you a little bit of, I'm glad some people get the joke. I'm going to talk about 3 eras in climate and energy policy in the United States. So we might think, so another title or a subtitle we could have is like, why in the world is climate and energy so hard for us to solve? And you say, and you could probably think of lots of reasons why it seems super hard, but frankly, right now, the solution is actually incredibly easy. If we spend $15-20 billion a year on new technology, R&D, fund those labs in those universities, working on super cool stuff, do a little bit of the bridge funding, but then let the VCs take over after that, and just like saturate the space. Like, well, I don't know, what about this great battery idea, or what about this pumped storage innovation, or let's just saturate the space on the technology side, like China did and has been doing. And then let's put on a carbon tax that sort of ramps up to $100 a year. Oh, $100 a ton, excuse me, I misspoke. About $100 a ton, which is about $1 on gasoline, 90 cents on gasoline. In 2035, 2040, 90% of the economy would be decarbonized. And then there would be a little bit here and a little bit there, and then we would be worrying about methane emissions from animals and so forth, and those are hard problems. But we basically solve the big bulk of the climate problem even here in the United States. You say 15 billion, 20 billion a year, that's a lot of money. Well, it's actually not a lot of money. That is not a lot of money compared to what we spend on, subsidies for who knows what, lots of things. So it's an easy problem. And that's one of the things that's so frustrating, is that we can't solve this easy problem. How did we get to this place where we can't seem to solve an easy problem? And then what does that mean going forward? So I'm going to give you my little Eras tour. All right, so let me give you, I'm going to go through three big facts. Big fact number one is that for many, so this is, what are we looking at here? This is net petroleum imports. So this is, so we drill crude oil. I don't know, for those of you who know about the oil thing, it's really interesting. We drill crude oil, and some of that we actually export, and then some of it is refined in other places, like in Saudi Arabia, and then some of that is shipped back as petroleum products like gasoline. We also do a lot of refining here. We consume a lot of that ourselves. We export a lot of that ourselves. On net, if you add everything up, if you add it all up, all of our petroleum, crude, and refined product, we were importing about 10 million barrels per day during the, so that's a ton, okay? So that's like a lot of petroleum. We were importing like 10 million barrels per day throughout the early 2000s. Then we started importing less, partly because of conservation efforts and conservation things, but also partly because we started to, invent fracking, and that fracking increased our petroleum production. Fracking really took hold in the 2000s, and now this is the zero line right here. Now we are a net petroleum exporter. This is a huge change over the last 3 years. We've shifted from being a huge importer of petroleum to now an exporter of petroleum and refined petroleum products. I'm not showing natural gas here. Natural gas is exactly the same thing. We used to import natural gas, and now we're the world's largest exporter of natural gas. So we've completely shifted over. The three largest petrostates are Saudi Arabia, the United States, and Russia. So that's our team Petro. Okay, this is employment in oil and gas production. So oil and gas production had a whole bunch of people employed in the 80s and so forth. But then, those were really big wells. Once you drill them, they just go on forever. Employment declines as productivity increases. So we were producing, but producing maybe a little bit less. There's this big bump in petroleum employment production and oil and gas production in the early 2010s. That's associated with fracking. Like you're hiring all these people to go out there and build fracking technology, fracking wells, and actually then we sort of learned how to do it without as many people. So we continued to produce more and more and more, but we didn't need as many people to do it. So that's the decline that you've seen. And now, actually, this is really pretty interesting. Employment in oil and gas production now is like, it's like almost half of its peak in 2014. So it's really come down and it's stabilized. Probably going to go down more as production technology improves. Third is the prices of solar panels, and I think everybody here is aware that renewables have really come down in price dramatically. They used to be completely out of reach. Then they were sort of expensive, and now in some depending upon what it is, solar panels are super cheap, and you don't use, they're still intermittent. Battery electric vehicles, if you do the break-even cost, you say how much does it cost to use over the course of the vehicle, it's actually in many cases cheaper to use a battery electric vehicle, to own a battery electric vehicle than it is to own an internal combustion engine. And that's probably going to flip completely in the next couple of years, so that it's not sort of close, but it's going to be battery electric vehicles are just going to be a ton cheaper. So we're now in a situation where the technology prices have really flipped. Okay, so fact number one is we've become a net oil exporter and gas exporter. Fact number two is employment has actually come down a lot in the oil and gas industry, but it's been high. And fact number three is that renewables are super cheap, and battery electric vehicles are going to dominate. So where does that leave us? These are the eras, the three eras, okay? So I think it's plausible. So the thing that was really, the reason I go through this is that I'm looking at this as this. If I were to ask you, why is it so hard to make progress on climate and energy? My guess is that many of you might be thinking, because we've got a really divided country, and because we have, this has become a partisan issue, and there's a lot of misinformation. And I'm not going to disagree with any of that. I'm taking a step back and looking at some of the fundamental drivers that might lead us to this sort of circumstance. In this era here, we actually had a surprising amount of agreement around climate and energy policy. So you remember John McCain ran on a climate platform, a pro-climate. Well, why would they possibly do that? There's a little bit of environmentalism in, but mainly it's because this is a national security issue. We're importing a ton of oil. We're exposed to international oil price fluctuations. We're exposed to closures in the Gulf of Hormuz. We had unanimous agreement about energy conservation. So the EPCA, Energy Policy and Conservation Act of 2005, introduced all these fuel economy standards, energy efficiency standards, air conditioners, all of that stuff dates back from this period where there was bipartisan decision that we needed to conserve energy, we needed to get off of oil because there's a national security threat and because it's bad for the climate. That has changed. And what's changed is we had this fracking period where there's this big boost in employment. So now it's kind of shifting over, we really like all of this employment in oil and gas, and that's good for the economy, and it was good for the economy. But renewables where prices were falling, but still, solar is still pretty expensive. The third era, which is sort of a transitional, the third era which we're in right now is really a hard one because we have now got a situation where renewables are more than cost effective, cost competitive, or they're going to be cheaper. We have falling oil and gas employment. So you think, well, maybe that means it's not important. Actually, that means that people have lost their jobs in the oil and gas industry, and there's a lot of political pressure to see how we could support the oil and gas industry so people can get those good jobs back, and we become a net exporter and a petrostate. What would we do if we were, so the question is, where does that leave us? These are some of these broad trends, and I'm just going to leave this here. So where does that leave us, and what does this mean for a road ahead? Another factoid, I don't know if this is really true, but the industry seems to think that we're going to reach peak fracking oil production in a few years, that we're sort of going to, most of the cheap plays like the Permian are going to be played out, and that it's only the more expensive ones. Unless oil goes up to $100, we're probably not going to see increasing production. We're probably going to start to see a decline in production, so we're going to sort of ease back on our petrostate status. If we were state-owned, so let's just step back. What would our optimal policy be if we were state-owned? It would probably be, let's use as much petroleum as we can while we can get it out of the ground, because there's this inevitable energy transition that's going to happen. And the optimal policy would be, if we were state-owned, let's take some of that money and invest it in renewables, and then we're going to be ready for the next generation. That's what Saudi Arabia is doing. We're doing the first part of that, but we're not doing the second part of that. And that's because Saudi Arabia is able to sit there with their engineers and their planners and think ahead and think about what's the 10-year horizon, 40-year horizon look like, and how should we prepare this for our children. We seem to be kind of stuck in this environment with our institutional structure of just thinking about the 3-year horizon. Now that's a really big challenge. Europe, why is Europe so progressive on climate? They've been in this stage all the time. They're just like massive importers, their energy prices are super high, like get off of oil, like what happened in Europe when there was the invasion of Ukraine? Gas prices went through the roof, super expensive, it was really painful for the economy. So that's where they live. Of course there's a consensus on getting off of oil. It's just a question of how do you do it, and then you might argue, well, maybe we should still use German coal or not use German coal. But climate is on the same side as energy security, which is on the same side as prices. The fundamental problem is that that's my last slide. The fundamental problem is that here in the United States, we still have this tension between low gasoline prices, low natural gas prices, and then oil companies that are really desperate to try to make the most of their current assets. And then we don't have as strong a constituency and a strong planning for the energy transition as they do perhaps in China. So it's a real challenge. I'm going to leave with a provocative statement. Sort of what's the road ahead, and what are we doing at the Salata Institute? What am I trying to do at Harvard? Harvard is nonpartisan. And the Salata Institute is nonpartisan. My opinion is that what we have to do is bring the oil companies along to help make this transition. So the oil companies need to have a real viable role in the future of this economy, just like Saudi Aramco is building up its renewables and its renewables portfolio for the day that it's not going to be pumping as much oil into gasoline. We're going to exit from oil much sooner than Saudi Aramco because our oil is expensive to get out of the ground. Let's get the oil companies on board and let's figure out ways to do that. And that's a long discussion, but that would be, I'm just leaving that as a provocative statement. So, and that is my last slide. I think we have some time for questions.
Do you see a future where we are still going to need some oil production for things like plastics and products that we haven't found a viable alternative for? And at what point do you start to say maybe from a security perspective we should keep that oil in the ground and let everyone else in the world get rid of theirs?
Yeah, well, I think there's from an economic perspective, it depends on the price of oil. Our oil is just more expensive to get out of the ground, so we might end up leaving some of it in the ground. If one can imagine a situation in which the demand for oil really drops in, say, 20 years, 30 years, and if that's the case, it could well be the case that the price of oil is going to drop as well. If the price of oil drops, then we're not going to be drilling here. It's just we're too expensive. It costs about $6 a barrel to get oil out of the ground in Saudi Arabia. So sort of you want to think about where we can go down. It can go down a long ways. But you say, well, wouldn't that make EVs like less cost competitive if we're at like $1 a gallon gasoline? The answer is not really, because the EVs are just going to be so cheap, and sort of photovoltaics are really cheap, and electricity is going to be cheap. So I'm not. I don't think we'd need to leave it in the ground sort of as a security thing. I'm sorry, the first part of your question was?
Just that it seems like things like plastics.
Oh, yeah.
Like we're always going to need
Thank you.
some.
Oil is going to be here forever, okay? Because, forever. Who knows what forever means? But we're going to be using plastics for a long time. The challenges for plastics are all recyclability, or maybe not recyclability, but just getting rid of the plastic weights and the microplastics and so forth. But it's a really useful product, so I expect that that's going to be around for a long time. That's a really hard nut to crack. And there's other applications. It's not at all clear what we're going to do for aviation. So one possibility for aviation is that we actually could have direct air capture where we remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, and that would exactly offset old-fashioned jet fuel that we're using for jets. And so I think that's in terms of the economics, that's absolutely in the running as far as we can tell today. All options for aviation are more expensive than just what we're doing now. There's no secret like photovoltaics that are coming in. Yeah, who's that? Yeah, okay.
Having worked for the DOT in Washington for many years, how do we, with your predictions, how do we support the trust fund, since it depends on supporting our entire infrastructures of highway system?
Yeah, this is a question about the Highway Trust Fund, and as you pay a 19-cent federal tax on, which has stayed constant in nominal terms since 1993, I think it is. So it stayed constant in nominal terms for ages, so you pay 19 cents a gallon. It turns out that inflation has actually gone up, and that it turns out to be more expensive now than it was then to fix your highways, so the trust fund is running out of money. And you've got to make people pay their fair share. I mean, if we're going to use the roads, we got to pay for it. Ask any economist, and every economist will tell you we should have a vehicle miles traveled tax, and maybe you could make it weight adjusted, because if you drive a little car, it's not going to be as big a deal as if you drive a Hummer or a truck or whatever. Vehicle miles traveled tax is really easy to implement because we all have the telemetry stuff in our cars, so like how much we drive, or you can just do it on an annual basis. It's a really easy tax to implement, and that's the sensible thing to do. Whether we ever do something like that, I don't know. The alternatives are these really clunky ones, like let's keep the gasoline tax fixed. The current one in Washington is let's just keep the gasoline tax fixed at 19 cents a gallon, whatever it was in 1993, and we're going to have you, if you're an EV owner, you have to pay a $250 fee. And if you work it out, that's about 50 cents a mile. And you say, well, it's not fair. But actually, it's about what it would have been if we'd indexed the original 19 cents to inflation. So maybe it is fair, and maybe the 19 cents should be 50 cents too. But there's a lot of solutions. It turns out we're not particularly good in Washington at coming up with answers these days. So Craig had a question.
Jim, you're in farm country. Talk a little bit about ethanol.
I am one of the few economists in the world who actually is a fan of biofuels. Yeah, I know. She's looking shocked. The reason, and Minnesota has a really innovative sustainable aviation fuel tax credit. I think it's $1.50 a gallon for up to a certain number of gallons, 42 million gallons or something like that. And they're starting a couple of hubs. One is up north, not surprisingly, northwest of St. Cloud, I think. So, why do I like biofuels? It's partly, I have to say, because of the politics. This is one of the few policies that we have from the from that early 2000s period, sort of the period where we all could agree. It's one of the few policies that we actually have left that's in place. It's been really durable. It's been durable because the politics are there. So the farmers, it has the bipartisan support. I think a more substantive, sort of stepping away from the politics, a more substantive reason for that, I think to the extent that biofuels have a bad name, there's justification for that because we got stuck in first generation technologies. So we got stuck in a place where we're using a lot of corn, food pathways for biofuels, it's corn and especially soybeans. So we're using a huge amount, like maybe a quarter to 40% of our soy crop and our corn crop for biofuels. You don't have to do it that way. The whole theory of the case there is that there's these other technologies, there are these other energy grasses, energy plants that can be converted over, and they don't need to, compete with the food stocks, and they can be grown on other lands, and you can get ethanol, and you can get ethanol out of that. That ethanol can be converted or upgraded using a variety of different technologies to jet fuel, so you could actually make sustainable aviation fuels at scale while reducing the demands on the feeds on the corn supply and the soybean supply. If we had the right policies, I view that entirely as a policy failure, not as a technology failure. So I think we're doing a lot of work on this at the Salata Institute, is trying to envision what are the right policy steps moving forward in biofuels and in sustainable aviation fuels. How do we pivot that from surface transportation to aviation transportation, which is a higher value solution? And that's my view. It's a fairly controversial view. But I think it's if we think about how are we going to decarbonize aviation, I think this is actually one of the one of the reasonable pathways. I'm not a fan of using biodiesel on surface transportation. I think that there's other higher, better uses for that fuel. I see you're still laughing, so I don't think I doubt you agree with me.
No, but thank you.
But we can argue this at length, I think.
I lose.
Right here, Jim.
Oh yeah, please.
Good morning. I think your students are very lucky if you are regularly presenting data in such an accessible fashion. I think everyone from Daniel Kahneman to my neighbor would probably agree that we're not rational, linear thinkers. And so I'm wondering from the long stretch of your career, you're in these rooms with decision makers, President Obama being one of them, right? And what are the surprising obstacles you've faced as you've hoped that those decision makers have reached what are clearly rational data-supported decisions?
I think one of the things that's fun about this slide, my heroes, like these are all like ultra rationalist. These are not the behavioral people. These are ultra rationalists. He's an ultra rationalist, right? I mean, these are two of the most impressive people I've ever met in my life in terms of their ability to think about a big problem and then distill it down to its essence, and then think about the trade-offs, and those trade-offs are going to include political decisions, and so they might not be exactly where the economist comes out, but they know exactly what's going on, and they think about all the pluses and minuses and weigh those. It's incredibly impressive. That's the way I was trained to think. That's the way I've always thought. That's not the way everybody in the world thinks. So I agree with you. This is sort of my comfort zone. I'm in a lot less of a comfort zone in sort of the where we are in terms of I don't have any particular expertise or insights except sort of those general mantras of you got to meet everybody where they are and that sort of thing. But it's hard. I mean, we're in a really hard conversation point today. But I think one of the points of going through this is that the conversation points that we're in today, it's not just because of polarization, it's not just because of disinformation, it's not just because of X and all of that stuff. It's actually there are these fundamentals that are living behind the conflicts that we're facing in our society. And that's why we have a very different approach. Our approach just looks a lot more like Russia's approach, but for fundamentally similar reasons, not political reasons, but just the underlying economics. It looks a lot less like Europe's approach because we have different fundamentals.
Got a question back here.
Yeah. Okay.
So as an economist who cares about climate and the environment, I'm curious what your advice is to investors in terms of how they should factor climate into their decision making, and maybe specifically I'd be curious if and how your team works with the team that manages Harvard's endowment to think about the climate impact of their capital allocation.
Yeah, so when I took my job, I said I do not want to have any responsibility for two things, and one of them is I don't want to have any responsibility for like whether people are using LEDs at Harvard. I want some staff office to do that. I don't want to waste my time on that. It's a good thing to do, and I don't want to do it. And the second one I said is I don't want to have anything to do with the endowment. And because that's just going to also eat a lot of my time, and there's good people who can work on that, and I want to focus on the academic teaching, research, engagement side of things. But more seriously to your point, I mean, there certainly are financial risks associated with climate. So climate is imposing financial and macroeconomic risks. And I was a member of something called the Climate-Related Financial Risk Advisory Committee, CFRAC, which is an advisory committee to the Financial Stability Oversight Council. The FSOC is the entity that incorporates the Fed and the Treasury and the Comptroller of the Currency and all of our other financial oversight committees, and so that was disbanded just about 3 weeks ago by the Trump administration, but its mandate was to look at climate-related financial risks and what they pose to various institutions. And short answer is that there are quite a few And some of them are really the most, like, really obvious. Like in the entire insurance industry, the insurance industry has really been going through major gyrations in California with the wildfires and home insurance changes and so forth. Same set of issues, a whole set of issues that are really fascinating in Florida, which looks like the insurance industry is okay, but actually it's not really okay. A lot of the majors have left, and there's these really bespoke little things that are just poised to go bankrupt as soon as there's a major hurricane, and then leave that with the state. So it's so there's that sort of thing, but then there's beyond that. I mean, honestly, I think that from my perspective, there's a physical risks and those impacts. But personally, I tend to think that the really big risks are actually not the physical risks, but maybe more the transition risks, the geopolitical risks. So certainly climate, those trends that we were just looking at are part. They are our inability to have climate discussions and move forward in a durable way is driven in part by those trends, because they actually drive the fundamental disagreements within our society that are leading to some very, very strange decisions. So you think about, from a financial perspective, there's been some incredible tectonic shifts that maybe are not on the front page of the newspaper, but are just as important as anything else we've seen. So I don't know if you're familiar with Revolution Wind and what's happened with Revolution Wind. It's off the coast of Rhode Island, and it was a project that was started a while ago. It had, like, God knows, a dozen years of permitting and, building and so forth. In August, end of August, the Trump administration, it's 80% built. They've invested $5 billion. 45 of the 65 turbines are up. They're there. They're ready to go. They're not plugged in, so they haven't finished the interconnection. About a month ago, a little less than a month ago, the Trump administration issued a stop work order, and it pulled the permits. How in the world are you going to operate any industry or any business if you are thinking you might make $5 billion of investment and have that pulled back? I mean, it doesn't matter whether you're building wind or LNG terminals or a nuclear plant or whatever, but if that sort of uncertainty is present, so that actually, I think, all traces back to these underlying trends. So there's an enormous amount of uncertainty. I think some of the uncertainty is wildfires and stuff, but most of the uncertainty, I think, is what we call in the trade transition risk, which is all of the political machinations and the challenges we have in terms of getting in place a durable climate policy. The wish, this is why I go back to, we've got to figure out how to get the oil companies on board. We have to figure out how to have a durable centrist policy that's just going to, it might not be the best policy ever, but is it durable and centrist? It's going to allow these trends to continue, and it will allow us to make this transition in an orderly way without big disruptions. So that's kind of long-winded, and I didn't give you any advice as to what to invest in, but I think that I would orient the climate discussion to be around energy transition risk.
Jim, we have time for
one more question. How about the woman in white here? We've had all male. Come on, I'm channeling my mom. We've had all male.
All right. Well, first of all, thank you for sharing all of your experience and your insight. It's been a fascinating talk. My question has to do with, we've been through these eras now, and one Blake alum has had a lot of impact on these things. There are a lot of parents here.
Yeah.
And so for our kids who are looking at possibly having the same impact in climate science or in this area, what advice or what insight do you have for them that we could share?
Well, first, don't get too distracted by the current noise in the United States right now. So this is really, stressful in my field. It's really difficult. It's stressful. It's a stressful time for Harvard. We haven't talked about Harvard at all, but it's a difficult time. But this problem is going to be with us for a considerable length of time. For their careers, there's going to be not just challenges. So if they're sort of more in the social, like we want to go help adaptation in the global South, that problem's going to be with us for a long time. If it's like, I'm an engineer, I want to do engineering and invent cool stuff, there's going to be cool stuff to invent for a long time. If it's, like I want to go start a business, that's going to, you know, make money in some aspect of the energy transition. Yeah, we're not doing offshore wind now. We're going to be doing offshore wind later. This is going to be going for a long time. There's trillions of dollars associated with this transition, and those trillions of dollars are lots of opportunities. So it's a really exciting space, and it's talk about trends, is a long-term trend, and it's going to happen, even though it's being really rocky. Yeah.
Thank you. So the gas tax went up in 1993 because of Mac's office, you may know that, in reaction to the BTU tax. Which I worked on, and before that had put together the first green, maybe only green tax package that passed in the Bush administration in '92. And in the 90s, the problem wasn't the Republican Party, the problem was the Democratic Party. At that time, the Democrats were in the South still, Warren of Oklahoma, Benson, Roy Benson of Texas, who became the Treasury Secretary to Clinton. But we were making a lot of progress on these matters. And then the pivot was to the cap and trade concept. And then Chairman of the Ag Committee, Colin Peterson in Minnesota, told me that there were the votes in the Ways and Means Committee for a carbon tax, but at the time it was cap and trade at Markey and others. So I would just, the polarization and that the Republicans moved the wrong way on this, I'm not entirely sure why that happened, but the reason more change didn't happen in the 90s was actually generally Democrats from coal and oil and gas states.
So I'm really glad you said that, and I hope I didn't give the impression. So I worked for Obama, so you know where my party affiliations lie, but I hope I didn't give the impression to say this is the Republicans' fault. That is not my view. That is not my view. I think there's plenty of mistakes. If we look at the history of the politics, there's plenty of mistakes on both sides. No dearth of that. The inability of the Democrats to embrace a carbon tax when they could have, a giant miss. When I was in the Obama administration, I was in charge of the economics from the White House. I was the guy in the White House who was in charge of the economics piece of regulatory policy. So I was like the lead economist from the White House on the Clean Power Plan. I look back on what I did 12 years ago, I just think it was wrong. I think we got it wrong. We were there telling people what to do. We were telling people, you got to buy a more fuel-efficient car, and then you get these internal combustion engines that turn off when you're at a red light, and then they turn on again, and like, oh God, I hate this stuff. Who's making me do this, you know? So we set the stage for people saying this climate stuff is just whatever. And I think I was really naive when I was working in the White House in terms of what the implications and how this would be accepted and so forth. And I think the Democrats were partly, ideological, and then partly just sort of naive and partly elitist. It's incredibly elitist for me to come from Harvard and to go have like one-on-ones with the president about, you know, how we should regulate the economy and tell people what to do. It's like, that's just not the right way to do things. So I've really evolved a lot. I think the IRA had some really fantastic stuff in it in terms of technology driving. It had some really bad stuff in it too. These EV tax credits, $7,500 that are basically going to pretty well-off people to buy an EV, which is a better performing car, and that's at like $400 billion on the Treasury. What a waste of money. And so, of course, that gets to be a target on its back. And then, of course, that's polarizing. And it was there for political reasons because we want to buy off these votes in these blue states, because the blue state people, the blue state rich people or upper middle class people are going to be the ones buying EVs and getting this. That's crummy economics, and it's actually bad. It's bad politics in the broad sense. It might be good politics in some really narrow sense in getting something passed, but it's bad politics in terms of how it sets the stage. So there is plenty of blame on all sides here. I agree with that. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
You're up. Oh, you're up. Oh, we have to read. Okay. Sorry about that. Okay.
Thank you.
Well, Jim, thank you so much. As one of the comments, I will follow up on one of the comments. Not only did you give us a substantive presentation, but you made it so accessible and personal, and it's no surprise that you are our Outstanding Alumnus Award recipient. So thank you so much for everything today. We have, at this particular Breakfast at Blake every year, we have an annual tradition. You'll see on your table a program. It's an in memoriam program, and it lists the names of our Blake and Northrop classmates, faculty, and coaches whom we've lost in the last year. So if you don't mind to join me in a moment of silence to recognize the people named in the program and anyone else in our Blake community that we've lost. Thank you. Our next Breakfast at Blake is in roughly a month. It's on October 30th. We'll be back to a Thursday schedule, and it is going to feature our 2025 Young Alumna Award recipient, and that is Thea Traff, class of 2009. She is a freelance editorial photographer, and she has amazing work. If you happen to Google her name or look at her Instagram account, her work has been featured in the New York Times, the New Yorker, and she has photographed everyone from President Biden to the Rolling Stones, Nicole Kidman, Diana Furstenberg, just any celebrity you can think of. She has amazing portfolio of work, and she's coming in from New York to receive the award and to speak with us and share her work as well. So that will be another amazing Breakfast at Blake. And then finally, one housekeeping matter. If you are going on the 10 a.m. tour of the campus, you will go that direction and meet in the lower school dining area, which is right behind there. So happy homecoming, happy reunion, and go Bears.